It begins here, not in a grand temple or with the proclamation of a king, but with a small, unassuming object held in the climate-controlled stillness of an archive. It is a clay tablet from Uruk, catalog number W2027-4. Roughly the size of a human hand, its weight feels permanent, a piece of dried and hardened earth that has outlasted its maker by 5,000 years. The surface is cool to the touch, covered in a dense constellation of wedge-shaped marks, impressed into the wet clay by a reed stylus. They are not pictures. They are not decorations. They are entries in a ledger, the quiet, meticulous work of an administrator whose name is lost, whose world has turned to dust, but whose accounting remains. This is where the silence starts to speak, not in what it says, but in how it says it. The translation of the marks is as mundane as the object itself. It is a record of grain distribution, a list of rations for temple workers, so many measures of barley for the weavers, a different quantity for the stone cutters, another for the overseers. Each entry is precise, formulaic, and deeply practical. This tablet, and thousands like it excavated from the same layer of earth, represents the birth of bureaucracy. It is the paperwork of a nascent civilization learning to organize itself, to measure its resources, to manage its labor. It is a document concerned only with the immediate, the tangible, the daily transactions that keep a city alive. There is no poetry here, no prophecy, only the cold, clear data of economic life at the dawn of history, recorded with an almost mechanical discipline. Yet, within this flood of ordinary accounting, a detail sits uneasily. A single term, designating a high administrative function, appears on this tablet and others of its era. It is not a simple word for chief or leader. It is a complex, specific title that implies a fully developed hierarchy, a system of governance with established roles and responsibilities. The term is not crude or developmental. It arrives in the earliest records complete, standardized, as if copied from a manual that does not exist. The language for a sophisticated bureaucracy seems to be present before the bureaucracy itself has had time to evolve. It is a single, perfectly formed gear in a machine that is still being assembled around it. One can almost feel the presence of the scribe, not as a person, but as a function. The hand that held the stylus moved with a practiced efficiency, the marks pressed into the clay with uniform depth and spacing. This was not the work of invention, but of transcription. The scribe was not creating a system. He was operating within one. The knowledge of that administrative term, its precise meaning and its place in the order of things, was simply assumed. It required no explanation, no footnote, no glossary. It was part of a shared, understood context, a context that was never written down and is now entirely absent. The clay records the data, but the operating system that gave it meaning is gone. This is not an isolated anomaly, a single scribal peculiarity. As the archives of Uruk, Nippur, and Lagash were unearthed and their contents catalogued, the pattern became undeniable. Across hundreds of miles and numerous city-states, the same strangely mature administrative and legal vocabulary appears in the earliest layers of writing. These are not just shared words for common objects, but abstract concepts for social organization, property rights, and contractual obligations, all expressed with a technical precision that seems to outpace the material evidence of the society that used them. It suggests a template, a standardized system of thought distributed and implemented with remarkable consistency, as if from a central source that predates the cities themselves. The implication of such a pattern is quiet but immense. It suggests that the invention of writing in Sumer may not have been a tool for creating a new order, but rather a technology for preserving an old one. The first scribes were not drafting the blueprints of their civilization. They appeared to be making a partial, durable copy of a system that was already understood, already complete. They were data entry clerks for a pre-existing framework, tasked with recording the transactions of the present, using the terminology of a past that is never explicitly mentioned. The tablets are not a beginning. They feel, in some strange and unsettling way, like an end, a final, fragmented backup. To remain with records like these is to keep watch over a very particular kind of silence. It is to recognize that the most important information is often what is absent. This practice of meticulous cataloging was not limited to goods and labor. The Sumerians applied the same administrative rigor to the concept of power itself. Authority, like barley, was something to be inventoried, its transfer recorded, its lineage documented. Kingship was not merely a state of being, it was an asset, an office with a clear chain of custody that stretched back into the deep past. The lists they compiled were not epic poems celebrating heroic deeds. They were succession documents, written with the same dispassionate precision as a warehouse inventory, tracking the institution of rule from one holder to the next, one city to another, through the orderly passage of time. One such document survived, copied and recopied for centuries. We know it as the Sumerian King List, preserved on artifacts like the Weld Blundell prism. It is a single, continuous record, a column of names and numbers. It begins by stating that kingship first descended from heaven to the city of Eridu. It then lists its first king and the length of his reign. Then the next, and the next. The entries are formulaic, repetitive, and bureaucratic. In Eridu, Alulim became king. He ruled for 800 years. The name is recorded. The location is recorded. The duration is recorded. The scribe then moves to the next entry with the same detached precision. There is no break in the text, no change in the cuneiform script, no shift in the administrative tone, no introductory phrase to signal a change from one kind of reality to another. After the reign of Alulim, the scribe records his successor. Alalangar ruled for 36 years. Then follows a list of 6 more kings, their reigns lasting for similarly impossible spans of time. 600 years, 43, 200 years, 28, 800 years. The document presents this information as simple data. It does not explain, it does not justify. It merely records, placing rulers with reigns of tens of thousands of years in the same continuous, unbroken list as historical kings who would later rule for 25. The impossible is catalogued with the same quiet diligence as the verifiable. The total of the first 8 reigns, as recorded by the scribe, is 200 years. This number is presented without comment. It is the sum of a column in a ledger, the result of a simple administrative calculation. The 8 kings are listed under a single civic heading, the city of Eridu. After the final name, the scribe notes the transfer of the asset. Then Eridu was defeated. The kingship was taken to Bad Tibira. The mechanism of this transfer is not described. The reason is not given. It is a transaction, a change in the location of an office. The list is not a history of a people. It is the documented movement of a function from one geographic point to another. The process is orderly, mechanical, and follows an internal logic that is never shared with the reader. In Bad Tibira, the accounting continues with the same dispassionate formula. 3 kings are recorded. The first, Enmen-Lu-Ana, is assigned a reign of 200 years. The second, Enmen-Gal-Ana, ruled for 800 years. The third, Dumuzid, the shepherd, is listed with a reign of 36 years. Again, the scribe provides no narrative, no embellishment, no justification for the numbers. He is merely the instrument of the record. The total for this second city is 108 years. The document then records the next transfer, noting that the kingship was moved to the city of Larak. The precision of the list implies a system of timekeeping and record management of immense stability, one capable of tracking history across spans of time that defy all modern human experience. At Larak, a single king is listed, En-Sipad-Zid Ana. His reign is recorded as 800 years. Following this entry, the kingship is transferred to Sippar, where another single king, Enmendur-Ana, is said to have ruled for 21,000 years. The fifth and final antediluvian city to hold the office is Shuruppak. Its sole king, Ubara-Tutu, is credited with a reign of 18,600 years. The scribe then performs another calculation, a final summary of this entire epoch. 5 cities, 8 kings from the first, 3 from the second, 1 from each of the last 3. The grand total is presented as a final administrative entry for the period, 385,200 years. The number is the only conclusion offered for this immense passage of time. Then the record shifts. The scribe does not announce a change in genre or a transition from one type of information to another. He simply makes the next entry in the sequence, an event that functions as a divider in the ledger. The line, written in the same cuneiform script and with the same administrative finality, reads, "Then the flood swept over." This is not presented as a myth or a divine punishment. It is an event that marks the end of an accounting period. It is the line drawn under a column of figures before a new calculation begins. The cataclysm is catalogued as a procedural event, a reset in the chain of custody for the institution of kingship. All prior reigns are now filed under a single, overarching event code. The list resumes immediately after this entry, with the same formulaic language. After the flood had swept over, and the kingship had descended from heaven a second time, the kingship was in Kish. The institution is not said to be reinvented or re-established by humankind. It is recorded as being sent down again, a transfer from the same source as before, merely delivered to a new location. The bureaucracy of heaven and earth resumes its function as if returning from a scheduled interruption. The scribe's work continues, his method unchanged, his purpose fixed on the meticulous documentation of this unbroken chain of authority, which now restarts in a world washed clean. The first king to rule from Kish after the flood is named Jushur. His reign is recorded as 200 years. His successor, Kulasina Bel, is listed with a reign of 960 years. The numbers, while smaller than those that came before, still exist in a register far beyond the scale of a human lifetime. The list continues through 23 kings in this first dynasty of Kish, their reigns lasting for centuries each. 900 years, 840 years, 720 years. The scribe records each one with the same methodical patience. There is no acknowledgement of the shift in scale, no explanation for the change in duration. The data is simply entered as it was received, a new set of figures in the same ancient ledger. The document is not a story. It is a table of succession. It accounts for a single asset, Nam Lugal in Sumerian, which we translate as kingship. This asset is treated as a tangible, singular entity. It can be held by a city. It can be taken by force. It can be transferred. It can be sent down from a higher authority. It is never created, only moved. The king list is the chain of custody document for this asset, tracking its location and its designated holder through deep time. The scribe is the archivist of this singular, powerful object, and his only duty is to record its passage without error, regardless of how impossible the details of the transfer may seem. This meticulous accounting of abstract concepts as tangible assets is not confined to the institution of rule. Another set of records, found on tablets from Nippur and other sites, presents a different kind of inventory. These documents list a series of concepts, technologies, and social constructs known as the ME. The term is difficult to translate directly. It refers to the fundamental principles and powers of civilization, but the Sumerians did not write philosophical treatises about them. They cataloged them. They created lists, numbered and ordered, as if taking stock of items in a divine warehouse or a cosmic database. One such list details a transfer of these assets. The document records that the god Enki, residing in his city of Eridu, was the keeper of over 100 of these me. The text presents them in a numbered sequence. Item 1. The Supreme Lordship. Item 2. The Godship. Item 3. The Exalted and Enduring Crown. Item 4. The Throne of Kingship. The list continues, cataloging not just objects of power, but the very arts of civilization. The scribe's craft, the craft of the smith, the craft of the leather worker, the craft of the builder. Each is an entry, a line item in a divine inventory of foundational knowledge. The narrative of the tablet Inanna and Enki is not a myth of creation, but an administrative record of acquisition. The goddess Inanna of Uruk travels to Eridu, and through a series of events, obtains the ME from Enki. The text meticulously lists the items she loads onto her boat of heaven for transport back to her city. The list is repeated multiple times throughout the tablet, a form of bureaucratic redundancy to ensure the accuracy of the inventory being transferred. She takes truth, the resounding music, the art of the hero, and the setting up of lamentations. These are not described as ideas she learned, but as discrete objects she took possession of and physically carried away. The list of me is a strange and unsettling document. It presents the pillars of organized society, law, ritual, craft, and power, as a finite set of exportable technologies. They are not the product of slow cultural evolution, but are pre-existing, standardized programs that can be owned, stored, and transferred from one power center to another. The scribe who copied this list was not composing a poem. He was performing an audit, ensuring that the manifest of civilization's operating system was correctly transcribed. The knowledge itself is never explained. Only its existence as a quantifiable, transferable asset is recorded. It is quiet now in this archive. The only sound is the low hum of the climate control that preserves these records. The hour is late. The scribe who made these marks worked by the light of a different sun, or perhaps a different kind of lamp, but the silence he worked in might have been the same. He was not concerned with an audience. He was concerned with the integrity of the data. His task was to ensure that the number, the name, and the formula were copied without deviation. To sit with his work is to become, for a moment, a fellow watcher of the record, suspended in the same deep, administrative quiet. Returning to the king list, this same cold precision is applied to figures who straddle the line between the impossible and the historical. Etana, the 13th king of Kish, is described as a shepherd, the one who ascended to heaven. The note is an administrative aside, a behavioral characteristic, before the essential data is given. He ruled for 560 years. Later in the list, we find the entry for Gilgamesh. He is listed as the 5th king of the first dynasty of Uruk. His father is recorded as a phantom, or a spirit. Then, the crucial administrative fact. He ruled for 126 years. The number is still large, but it marks another step down in the scale of duration. The list continues its inexorable march forward in time. The dynasties of Ur, Awan, and Hamazi are recorded. The reign lengths become progressively more believable. Kings are listed with reigns of 30 years, 12 years, 6 years. The scribe's hand does not alter. His formula does not change. The entry for a king who ruled for a handful of years is structurally identical to the entry for a Lulim, who ruled for 800. The system of documentation is absolute and makes no distinction between categories of truth. It is a single, continuous data stream, a timeline of administration that treats all its entries with equal weight and seriousness. The scribes who maintained this list were not working from a single original document. They were copying from earlier versions, preserving a tradition of accounting that was already ancient in their own time. The Weld Blundell prism, one of our most complete copies, was inscribed around 1800 BCE, but it documents kings and events that were already thousands of years in its past. The scribe was a link in a long chain of data preservation. His role was not to question or interpret the record, but to ensure its perfect transmission. The impossible numbers were part of the official data set, and to alter them would be to corrupt the archive. This act of preservation extended to the very structure of the documents. The lists were often concluded with summaries, as if closing out a fiscal period. The scribe would total the number of kings in a dynasty, the number of years they ruled, and note the city where kingship was held. There are 12 kings. They ruled for 310 years. Then the dynasty of Kish was defeated. The kingship was taken to Eanna. These summaries reinforce the document's nature as an administrative report. It is a balance sheet of power, audited and closed out before the next period of accounting begins. The cumulative effect of these records is one of profound dissonance. On one hand, they are the work of a rational, orderly, and highly organized bureaucracy. On the other, the content they so carefully preserve is, by any modern standard, impossible. The scribes of Sumer present us with a meticulously documented history of a world that could not have existed, yet they do so using the mundane and practical tools of warehouse management and state accounting. They leave us with ledgers filled with ghosts and gods, their reigns calculated to the year. The final lines of the king list, as preserved on the prism, offer no grand conclusion. The document simply stops. After listing the kings of the Esan dynasty, the scribe records the last ruler, Damik-Ilishu, and his reign of 23 years. The text concludes with a final tally of all the dynasties, cities, and years recorded since the flood. It is a final summary calculation, an administrative total. The document does not end with a prophecy or a moral. It ends with a number, the sum of a long and unbelievable column of figures, recorded with unwavering precision on a small block of hardened clay. The work is no longer one of excavation, but of arrangement. On the felt-covered surface of a long table under the neutral glow of archival lighting, the records are brought into proximity. A photograph of the Weld-Blundell prism, with its dense columns of names and numbers, is placed beside a translated ledger of grain distribution from Jemdet Nasser. To their right, a transcription of the inventory of ME, taken by Inanna. They are from different cities, separated by centuries, concerned with different subjects. Yet, when laid side by side, they cease to be isolated artifacts. They begin to speak to one another in a shared, unnervingly consistent language of structure. The dust of their respective ruins gives way to the clean, cold lines of an underlying architectural design. The first point of resonance is the tone. It is the unwavering voice of the administrator, a voice that permeates every document regardless of its content. The same formulaic precision used to record a shipment of wool is applied to the transfer of kingship from heaven to earth. The scribe who calculates the total years of an antediluvian dynasty uses the same mathematical finality as one who totals measures of barley for a gang of laborers. There is no shift in register, no change in the perceived importance of the data. The fantastic is processed through the same bureaucratic apparatus as the mundane, its impossibility rendered neutral by the sheer, dispassionate methodology of the record-keeping itself. The system is indifferent to the nature of the information it contains. This uniformity of method suggests something more profound than a shared scribal culture. It points towards a single, underlying philosophy of information management. In this system, everything is data. Kingship, divinity, law, labor, and grain are all quantifiable assets, to be inventoried, tracked, and audited. The universe these tablets describe is not one of myths and metaphors, but of cosmic accounting. The scribes were not priests composing theology or poets crafting epics. They were auditors, ensuring the ledger of existence was balanced, that every asset was accounted for, and that its chain of custody was documented according to a procedure that was already ancient, absolute, and unquestioned. One must pause here. The air in the room is still, heavy with the silence of the clay. The distance between the researcher's hand and the cuneiform marks is not just a few inches of space, but 5 millennia of time. Yet the logic bridging that gap feels strangely familiar. It is the logic of a database, of a system designed for the efficient storage and retrieval of information. The coldness of the record is not a lack of emotion. It is a feature of the technology. It is the mark of a system designed for permanence and clarity, a system that prioritizes the integrity of the data structure over the narrative content it is used to hold. The second pattern emerges from this shared logic: the treatment of abstract concepts as physical, transferable objects. The Sumerian king list does not describe the rise and fall of political influence. It documents the movement of a singular asset named kingship from one geographic location to another. The kingship was taken to Bad Tibira. The phrase is transactional. Similarly, the ME are not cultural achievements that are learned or developed. They are a finite collection of over 100 discrete items, inventoried by Enki, which can be loaded onto a boat and transported. Truth and the scribe's craft are treated as cargo, no different from lumber or precious metals. This conceptual framework is profoundly alien. It presents civilization not as an organic process, but as a pre-packaged technology, a set of programs that can be installed in a city to make it function. The lists of ME and the king list are, in essence, two sides of the same coin. One is the inventory of the operating system's core components, the software. The other is the log file tracking the installation and transfer of the highest administrative function, the hardware's primary user account. Both documents are written from the perspective of a user, or perhaps an administrator of the system, not from the perspective of its creator. The origin of the technology is never discussed. Its existence is simply a premise. To continue watching these connections form is to recognize a certain kind of quiet commitment. It is to choose to remain in the presence of a pattern that does not resolve, but only deepens with inspection. Those who stay with this archive are not seeking answers, but a clearer view of the question itself. The third pattern connects the ME directly to the anomalous, fully formed language found in the earliest administrative tablets. If the scribe's craft is a specific, transferable program, then it is logical to assume it came with a predefined set of functions, protocols, and a standardized vocabulary. The technical terms for legal contracts, property rights, and hierarchical roles that appear suddenly in the Uruk tablets would not be inventions. They would be the built-in lexicon of this me, the user interface for a much older system of social organization. The scribes were not developing a new language. They were booting up an old program. Therefore, the invention of writing was not the birth of bureaucracy, but merely the moment a pre-existing bureaucratic system was ported to a new, more durable storage medium: clay. The scribes were not architects designing a new social machine. They were technicians making a partial backup of a system that was already running. A system whose full code was stored elsewhere, or perhaps was already being lost. The tablets are not the blueprint. They are the surviving command lines, the functional fragments recorded for posterity, stripped of their explanatory context. They preserve the how, but never the why. The researcher's finger traces the outline of a single cuneiform sign on a high-resolution image. The wedge shape is perfect, the impression in the clay clear and confident. This was not the mark of a hand struggling with a new idea. It was the mark of a hand performing a known function, executing a command from a memorized set. The scribe was not an author filled with the anxiety of creation. He was an operator, a conduit for a stream of information that flowed through him, a stream whose source was already far upstream, lost in the depths of the unrecorded past he was tasked to manage. What emerges from the comparison of these documents is the ghost of a template. The king list, the ME inventories, and the daily administrative ledgers all appear to be instances of a single, standardized format for recording reality. They are different forms, filled out for different purposes, but the underlying structure of the forms is the same. The universe is a ledger. Time is a sequence of entries. Power is a transferable asset. Civilization is a numbered list of technologies. The consistency of this model across every type of record suggests a worldview so powerful and so complete that it required no explanation. It was not a story to be told, but an operating system to be used. The sheer volume of the evidence prevents these patterns from being dismissed as coincidence. This is not the work of a single, eccentric scribe or a localized cult. These structural similarities are found in the archives of dozens of cities, copied and preserved by generations of administrators over a span of more than 1,000 years. The system was robust, widely distributed, and remarkably stable. It was the shared intellectual technology of an entire civilization, the common framework through which they organized their world, their history, and their relationship with the forces that governed both. The pattern is not an anomaly within the record. The pattern is the record. This realization shifts the focus of the investigation. The question is no longer, what do these impossible entries in the king list mean? But what kind of system produces a single document that seamlessly integrates the impossible and the historical? The question is no longer, what are the ME? But why was civilization itself conceptualized and cataloged as a finite inventory of portable technologies? The anomalies are not the point. The point is the machine that generated them, a machine of immense logic and consistency, whose purpose remains entirely outside the frame of the data it recorded. The archaeologist straightens up from the table, looking over the array of documents. The individual mysteries of each tablet have dissolved into the single, larger mystery of the system that connects them. The records are no longer just about kings, gods, or grain. They are about a method of structuring knowledge that seems to have been inherited, not invented. A method that was meticulously preserved, its functional components copied with religious precision, even as the original context and meaning were allowed to fade into an undocumented silence. The scribes were the faithful librarians of a library whose foundational texts were already missing. There is a deep and profound tension in this. The Sumerians are credited with the invention of history, the first to write down their past. Yet their most foundational historical documents seem to point to a past that was not their own. They appear as the inheritors of a legacy, the caretakers of a fragmented archive. Their meticulous records do not feel like a beginning. They feel like a concerted, desperate effort at preservation, a final transcription of the most critical data points from a vast, failing system, saved onto the most durable medium they could devise. The work of the scribe, seen in this light, becomes an act of immense, tragic diligence. He sits in the low light, the reed stylus in his hand, pressing the abstract shapes into the wet clay. He is not writing for his contemporaries, who already know the system. He is not writing for us, for he cannot imagine a world where the context is lost. He is simply executing his function, to copy the data exactly as it was received, to ensure the numbers are correct, the formulas are exact, and the sequence is unbroken. He is preserving the signal, unaware that the silence that surrounds it will one day be all that is left. The pattern is now clear, but it offers no comfort. It is the pattern of a shadow, a coherent and structured absence. It is the outline of a body of knowledge defined only by the fragments it left behind in the administrative machinery of its successor. The king list, the me, the atemporal language, they are not Sumerian inventions. They are artifacts. They are the durable, functional remnants of a different and much older science of the state, a science whose first principles are nowhere to be found. The archive table is no longer a collection of Sumerian records. It is a debris field. The source of the system is, in the end, recorded. It is not left to implication. The scribe, with his characteristic precision, notes the point of origin for the primary asset of civilization. The Sumerian king list is unambiguous in its opening statement. It does not say that kingship was invented by a strong leader, or that it evolved from tribal councils. It states, as a simple administrative fact, that the institution first descended from heaven. This is not presented as a metaphor. It is the first entry in a long chain of custody document, the initial transfer of an asset from a higher external jurisdiction to the terrestrial sphere. The location of the first earthly franchise is also noted with geographic specificity, the city of Eridu. The process is orderly, documented, and begins with a transaction from another place. Within this framework, the entities who occupy this higher jurisdiction are also named. They are not vague, elemental forces. They are a specific, named collective, referred to in the texts as the Anunnaki. The term itself is a functional description. Those who from heaven to earth came. Their identity is their trajectory. They are defined by an act of transit, a movement between two distinct domains. In the administrative landscape of the Sumerian records, they are the board of directors, the founding partners, the upper tier of a cosmic hierarchy whose decisions are recorded, but whose own origins are simply assumed. They are the source from which the decrees flow, and from whom the core technologies of civilization are dispensed. Their presence is not mythological. It is structural. The records do not concern themselves with the nature of these beings, only with their function and their place in the operational command structure. They are the great, silent partners in the enterprise of civilization. When they appear in the economic and legal tablets, it is as the ultimate authority, the final arbiters of disputes, or the owners of the temple lands that form the basis of the city-state's economy. The human administrators, from the king down to the temple scribe, are presented as local managers, executing a business plan and following procedural guidelines that were established by this off-world authority. The tablets are the earthly paperwork of a vast, vertically integrated organization, and the Anunnaki are the names that appear on the corporate letterhead. Consider the figure of Enlil. In later traditions, he is a storm god, a tempestuous deity. But in the earliest administrative context, his title is more specific, Lord of the Command. His function is executive. The tablets describe him presiding over the assembly of the Anunnaki, issuing the decrees that determine the fates of cities and kings. His word is not prophecy, it is policy. His actions are those of a chairman making a final decision, which is then entered into the official record and transmitted down the chain of command for implementation. He is the source of the operating instructions, the one who authorizes the programs that run the terrestrial world. The texts are not hymns of praise. They are the minutes of his meetings. His counterpart, Enki, operates in a different but equally administrative capacity. His domain is Eridu, the first seat of kingship on earth. His title is often Lord of the Earth or Lord of the Sweet Waters, but his primary function in the records is that of a custodian. He is the keeper of the me, the divine formulas for civilization. He is not their creator, he is their archivist. He holds the foundational patents, the source codes for the technologies of social order. His story is not one of creation from chaos, but of information management and technology transfer. The inventory of ME is his collection, meticulously catalogued, and his role is to guard this repository of cosmic knowledge, dispensing or losing it through recorded and verifiable transactions. One must be still for a moment to feel the weight of this. The low light of the archive falls across the translated text. The words on the page are not about faith or belief. They are about structure, process, and hierarchy. They describe a world governed not by magic, but by a kind of hyper-rational, albeit incomprehensible, bureaucracy. The universe of the Sumerian scribe is a regulated, administered space. The forces that control it are not whimsical gods. They are the executives of a cosmic state, whose primary concerns are the proper functioning of their system, the integrity of their data, and the clear documentation of their chain of command. The silence here is not empty. It is the quiet of a vast, functioning machine. The relationship between this higher administration and the human sphere is explicitly defined. A human king's legitimacy is not derived from the consent of the governed, but from the sanction of this external authority. The king is the tenant farmer of Enlil, the designated overseer of the god's estate on earth. His coronation is not a local political event, but the activation of his role as a terrestrial liaison. He is given the tools to perform his function: the scepter, the crown, the shepherd's crook, which are themselves listed among the the standard issue equipment for the office. He is an appointee, and his performance is subject to review by the higher council, which can, and often does, transfer the franchise of kingship to another city if the current holder fails to meet his obligations. This brings the impossible reigns of the antediluvian kings into a different focus. They are not simply exaggerated figures of myth. Within the logic of the administrative system, they represent the first series of appointees, the original administrators who governed for periods that were consistent with the operational timescale of the higher authority, not the biological timescale of their human subjects. The scribe recording their reigns of 28, 800 or 43, 200 years is not engaging in fantasy. He is entering data from a different class of being, using the same formula because the office, the kingship, is the same. The duration of the appointment is simply a variable, and the scribe's duty is to record the number given in the record, not to question its possibility. The transfer of the ME from Enki to Inanna can now be seen in its proper context. It is not a story of a wily goddess outsmarting a drunken god. It is a documented hostile takeover of intellectual property. Inanna of Uruk acquires the core operating systems of civilization from Enki of Eridu and transports them to her own city, effectively upgrading its status. The text's repetitive listing of the acquired ME is not poetic emphasis. It is a manifest, a detailed inventory of the assets being transferred. The journey on the boat of heaven is the transport of this priceless technological cargo. The story is a case study in the acquisition and implementation of the foundational programs that allow a city to become a major power. This bureaucratic rationality extends to the numerical systems associated with the Anunnaki. In later Mesopotamian texts, the primary members of the council are assigned specific numbers in the sexagesimal system. Anu, the supreme authority, is 60. Enlil, the executive, is 50. Enki, the custodian of knowledge, is 40. These are not arbitrary holy numbers. They appear to be rank designators, seniority codes within a hierarchical system. They suggest a level of organization that is mathematical and precise, where authority is not just descriptive, but quantifiable. The universe is not only managed, it is numbered. The structure is not just a hierarchy, it is a database with assigned values. The researcher looks up from the tablet towards the darkened windows of the archive. Outside, the modern world hums along, unaware of this ancient, silent order. What is being uncovered here is not a religion. It is an organizational chart, a vast, detailed, and internally consistent plan for a complex enterprise. The names of the Anunnaki are the names on the office doors of a cosmic bureaucracy. The myths are the records of their policy decisions, their jurisdictional disputes, and their technology transfers. The entire corpus of Sumerian foundational texts begins to look less like a culture's attempt to explain the world, and more like a culture's attempt to preserve the operating manual of a system they inherited but did not fully understand. What is most conspicuously absent from these records is any sense of the personal or the psychological. The texts record the decrees of the Anunnaki, but never their doubts. They list their titles, but not their inner thoughts. They document their actions, but not their motivations beyond the simple functioning of the system. They are presented as a class of beings defined entirely by their functions. They are their job titles. This profound lack of interiority is one of the coldest and most unsettling aspects of the record. It suggests that the scribes were not recording the lives of beings, but the operations of a set of roles within a machine. The personality was irrelevant. The function was everything. The Great Flood, in this context, becomes a procedural reset. In the Epic of Atrahasis, the decision to destroy humanity is made in a formal assembly of the Anunnaki. The reason is not moral failing, but administrative inconvenience. Humanity has become too numerous, and their noise is disrupting the council. The decision is a top-down executive order to solve a logistical problem. The saving of a single human, Ziusudra or Utnapishtim, is the result of a leak from within the administration, the rogue action of the tech custodian Enki, who provides his chosen servant with the specifications to build a survival vessel. The cataclysm itself is a planned, systemic purge, not a moment of divine rage. After the flood, the system is reinstated. The king list records that kingship descended from heaven a second time. The procedure is initiated again from the same external source. The same administrative model is put back in place. The continuity of the system is the paramount concern. The new line of human kings in Kish is granted authority by the same unseen board of directors. The world has changed, the human lifespan is shorter, but the political and social operating system is reinstalled from the same master disk. The purpose of the record is to show this unbroken chain of command, to demonstrate that the post-Diluvian order is a legitimate continuation of the original sanctioned enterprise. The ultimate strangeness of these others is not their power, but their logic. They are not the chaotic, passionate, and deeply human gods of the Greek pantheon. They are administrators. They are planners, engineers, and legislators. The world they build is one of rules, measures, and calculated order. Their presence in the record explains the sudden appearance of a mature, complex bureaucracy in Sumer. The system was not invented locally, but was implemented as a pre-existing template. The human scribes were the first generation of employees trained on a foreign software, tasked with managing the local franchise of a vast cosmic corporation. Their work was not creation, it was administration. And yet, for all the meticulous detail of this administrative record, the administrators themselves are gone. Their names are preserved, their decrees are copied, their functions are catalogued. But the beings themselves are a profound absence. The system they established continued to run, tended to by generations of human scribes who preserved the formulas and copied the lists with a fidelity that bordered on worship. But the Anunnaki themselves are present only as ghosts in their own machine, a higher authority whose existence is documented and required by the system, but who no longer answer when called. The archive is a record of their work, but their office is now silent, and has been for a very long time. The machine of the archive has a rhythm, a steady pulse of data entry and retrieval. It is a logic of presence, of what was written, what was counted, what was preserved. But now, the work demands a different kind of attention. It requires listening not to the record, but to the pauses in its recitation. The focus must shift from the solid earth of the tablet to the immense, structured voids between them. For the most complete part of this story is not written in cuneiform. It is inscribed in silence, a deliberate and repeating absence that is as much a part of the design as any mark impressed in clay. This is the territory of the invisible antagonist, the quiet force of erasure that shapes the entire record by what it chooses not to preserve. We see its work in the earth itself, long before we see it in the texts. In the deep archaeological cuts at Uruk and other sites, there are breaks in the continuity of civilization. Between the layers designated Uruk IV and Jemdet Nasr, a transition occurs that is too sudden, too complete. The ornate pottery styles of the late Uruk period vanish, replaced by a new, less sophisticated design. Architectural methods shift. The very fabric of material culture is altered, not through gradual evolution, but as if a switch was thrown. There is no clear layer of decline or slow transformation. There is one distinct, highly advanced cultural signature, and then, separated by a thin line of sterile soil, another. The process of the change is a missing page, a silent interval in the physical record of the world's first city. This same abruptness is found in the work of the scribe. His lists, for all their methodical precision, are not continuous streams of information. They are islands of data in a vast, unrecorded sea. A king list from one city will cover a specific dynasty in exhaustive detail, only to fall silent for centuries before another scribe, in another city, picks up a different thread of the narrative. The administrative archives themselves operate in bursts of intense activity, documenting years of meticulous transactions before the records cease for a generation or more. These are not the random losses of time. They feel like scheduled blackouts, periods where the recording function of the civilization was deliberately powered down, leaving behind a silence that is both absolute and systemic. This silence is most profound where it is most needed. The me, those foundational programs of civilization, are presented without preamble or explanation. The complex administrative language of the earliest tablets arrives without a glossary. There are no surviving documents that explain the system to itself. No scribal school texts have been found that teach the philosophy behind the cosmic bureaucracy. No manuals that define the precise functions of the Anunnaki. No introductory treatise on the principles of kingship. The entire conceptual framework that gives the data its meaning is absent. We have been given the machine's output, the final results of its calculations, but the source code and the user manual have been completely and surgically removed from the archive. One must sit with this absence for a moment. It is not the quiet of a forgotten or illiterate people. It is the quiet of profound, shared context. The scribe did not need to write down the meaning of kingship or the nature of Enlil, because for his world these things were self-evident. They were the unquestioned operating assumptions of his reality. He was recording the transactions, not defining the terms of service. The silence is the echo of a world so saturated with this knowledge that it never occurred to anyone that it would one day need to be explained. We are straining to read the manual in a room where the light was turned off 5,000 years ago. This pattern of interruption is not random. It has a history. After the cultural peak of the Jemdet Nasr period around 3000 BCE, Mesopotamia enters a phase archaeologists call the Early Dynastic I period. For roughly a century, the use of writing, which had been flourishing, seems to contract dramatically. The number of tablets found from this period is a tiny fraction of what came before. The great administrative machines of the cities appear to go quiet. It is a dark age, not of chaos, but of information silence. The meticulous accounting stops. The chain of custody for the data is broken. It is as if the civilization held its breath for 100 years, leaving a gap in the record that separates the archaic world from the historical dynasties that would follow. Here, the nature of the antagonist becomes clear. It is not a person or an entity that destroys. It is a principle of selective preservation. This force does not burn the library. It curates it with a ruthless efficiency. It strips away every piece of contextual, explanatory, and philosophical information, leaving only the most durable, functional components. The king lists, the inventories, the legal formulas, the numerical totals. It preserves the what, but systematically erases the why and the how. The result is a record that is technically readable but conceptually alien, a collection of powerful command lines severed from the programming language that gave them meaning. The silence is not an accident of time, it is an act of profound and deliberate redaction. We see this redaction in the very structure of the king list. The entries are transactions, not stories. Then the flood swept over. This line is not a chapter break, it is an event code that closes one accounting period. Then the kingship was taken to Kish. This is the record of a transfer, but the narrative of that transfer, the conflict, the politics, the human drama, is completely absent. The scribe's formula erases the event itself, preserving only its administrative consequence. The silence consumes the cause, leaving behind only the effect, recorded with the cold finality of a closed ledger. The most important events in this history are the ones that exist only as the silent spaces between two lines of text. Take a moment. Listen not to the voice speaking now, but to the interval between the reign of Ubara-Tutu of Shurupak and the reign of Jushur of Kish. In that pause, in that single line break, lies the flood. The entire destruction and remaking of the world is contained in that quiet, unwritten space. That silence is the true artifact. It is the most complete record we have of the cataclysm, precisely because it is empty. The others, the Anunnaki themselves, are the ultimate subjects of this silence. They are named as the source of the system, the authors of the decrees, the ultimate authority in the hierarchy. Yet, they are almost entirely absent from the daily life of the records their system created. They do not appear in the ration lists or the land sale documents as active participants. They are a remote authority, a silent board of directors whose foundational decisions are cited, but who no longer take part in the day-to-day operations. Their direct communication seems to cease early in the historical record, leaving behind only the automated system they designed, and the human administrators tasked with running it in their long, unexplained absence. This silence extends to their inner lives, to their motivations. The texts record their decisions, but never their deliberations. We are told that Enlil issued a command, but not what he thought or felt as he did so. The decision to destroy humanity in the Atrahasis epic is presented as a solution to a noise complaint, a logistical problem. This explanation is so profoundly administrative, so devoid of emotion or morality, that it only serves to deepen the silence around their true nature. They are beings defined by function, whose ultimate purpose is a complete and impenetrable void in the record. They are the architects of the system, and yet they are the system's greatest unknown variable. This pattern of presence and absence is written into the landscape. The great cities of Sumer were not continuously inhabited. Archaeologists find layers of intense urban activity, filled with tablets and monumental architecture, separated by sterile layers of wind-blown sand. Cities like Shurupak, the home of the last antediluvian king, were abandoned for centuries before being reoccupied. These are not just gaps in the written record. They are physical voids in the timeline of civilization, periods where a major center of the system simply went dark, its archives silent, its streets empty, before the program was rebooted generations later. The silence is etched into the very soil. At times, the silence is born not of absence, but of contradiction. Different copies of the king list, found in different cities, preserve slightly different sequences of kings, or assign them different reign lengths. The scribes were copying from older sources, but it is clear they were not all working from the same master document. The tradition had already fractured. The signal was already degrading. These discrepancies are the sound of a story coming apart, the static of a transmission from a source that has grown distant and faint. The silence here is the lost original, the single, coherent ur-text from which all these fragmented and contradictory copies are descended. The final silence is the death of the system itself. Over thousands of years, the cuneiform script and the languages it recorded were replaced by simpler alphabetic systems. The last known cuneiform tablets, from the 1st century CE, were written by priests in Uruk, desperately trying to preserve the ancient rituals and astronomical knowledge. But the context was gone. They were copying texts whose full meaning was lost even to them, preserving the sounds of prayers whose purpose they no longer truly understood. The silence here is the final victory of the antagonist. The vast, complex machine of Sumerian knowledge finally fell quiet. its operating language forgotten by the very last of its users. And what of the silences that remain untouched? The modern world has excavated only a fraction of the ancient Mesopotamian cities. For every archive that has been brought into the light, dozens more remain buried beneath the tells of Iraq and Syria. The records we possess, the foundation of this entire investigation, are a statistically insignificant sample of what was once written. The greatest library of Sumer remains unread, its contents a complete unknown. The most profound silence is the one that emanates from the earth itself, from the millions of tablets still waiting in the dark, holding the data that could complete the pattern, or shatter it entirely. This leads to a deeply unsettling possibility. Perhaps this pervasive, structured silence is not a flaw in the record. Perhaps it is the record's central feature. What if the system was intentionally designed for this kind of fragmented preservation? What if the goal was never to preserve the context, the philosophy, or the story, but only to ensure the survival of the most essential, functional data, the king lists, the divine formulas, the core administrative commands, embedding them in the mundane paperwork of a civilization to be carried like a genetic code through deep time, stripped of their original meaning but preserved in their original structure? The archive room feels different now. The air is heavier. The rows of catalog tablets no longer seem like a collection of answers, but a carefully arranged constellation of absences. The story is not contained in the marks pressed into the clay. It is in the negative space they create, the vast, silent architecture of what was left unsaid, unwritten, and unremembered. We have been reading the evidence, but the true testimony lies in the gaps between the words. The consequence of this realization is that every fragment that does survive is now altered. It is no longer a beginning, a foundation stone of a new civilization. It is an artifact from a different kind of event. A salvage operation. Each tablet is a single, durable piece from a vast and intricate structure that has been dismantled, its connecting parts dissolved into time. The meaning of each surviving piece is no longer defined by what it is, but by its relationship to the immense, silent void of the structure it was once a part of. This changes the nature of the object in the hand. The clay tablet is no longer a record of a civilization's birth. It is evidence of a calculated response to a civilization's end. The meticulous accounting, the lists, the cold administrative language. This is not the sound of a world being built. It is the sound of a world being packed away, its most vital components disassembled, catalogued, and stored in the most durable containers available. The scribes of Uruk were not pioneers on a new frontier. They were the archivists of a fallen one, tasked with preserving the essential data from a library whose main halls were already flooded and collapsing. Their work was not an act of creation, but an act of salvage on an almost unimaginable scale. If this is true, then the civilization we call Sumer was not a beginning. It was a vessel. Its entire social and political structure was a means to an end, a temporary but stable platform designed to carry a specific cargo of information through a vast and dangerous ocean of time. The development of its cities, its trade, its religion, all of this was secondary. The necessary superstructure built around the climate-controlled hold where the true legacy was stored. The Sumerians were the custodians of a message they themselves could not fully read, their primary historical function being the protection and faithful transmission of a data fragment from a world that was not their own, a world that had already passed beyond the horizon of memory. This reframes the Anunnaki and their role completely. They cease to be gods or kings in any sense we would understand. They become the authors of the salvaged data, the original programmers of the system being backed up. Their decrees, their hierarchies, their cosmic bureaucracy. These were not systems for governing humanity in real time. They were the system being saved. The entire administrative apparatus they established on Earth was a preservation machine. The human king, the tenant farmer of Enlil, was not a ruler. He was the local site manager of an archival project. His legitimacy derived from his adherence to the established protocols for data integrity. His function was to ensure the machine kept running, the scribes kept copying, and the data was not corrupted. The light in this room reflecting off the glass case feels thin, almost exhausted. The air, conditioned to a precise humidity, is the sterile atmosphere of a clean room, a space designed to prevent contamination. The tablets themselves are no longer just artifacts. They are engineered objects, time capsules designed with a profound understanding of entropy and decay. Clay, fired and dried, is one of the most stable information storage mediums possible, resistant to water, fire, and time. The choice of this medium was not an accident of technological limitation. It was a deliberate engineering decision made by a consciousness that planned for survival on a geological timescale. The medium is an integral part of the message. Within this framework, the impossible reign lengths of the antediluvian kings become something other than myth. They are a signature. They are a data point from the original system, preserved with perfect, literal fidelity, not because the scribe believed a man could rule for 36 years, but because his instructions were to copy the data exactly as it was received. These numbers are a watermark, a fragment of the original system's physics and temporality, left embedded in the record. They function as a calibration key, a diagnostic code that says, "The information you are reading originated in a system where these values were not anomalous, but standard." They are the metadata of a forgotten science. The ME are likewise transformed. They are not a simple inventory of cultural traits. They are the compressed files, the core executables of the salvaged operating system. Each entry on the list, kingship, Duri, the scribe's craft, truth, is a condensed package of immense complexity. A program essential for rebooting a high-level civilization. The list is not a poem. It is a recovery manual, a checklist of the critical software that had to be saved. The story of Inanna taking them from Eridu to Uruk is not a myth. It is the record of a server migration, the transfer of the foundational code from one secure site to another. The purpose was to create redundancy, to ensure the survival of the system by distributing its core components. This leads to the central, unstable implication that rests at the heart of the archive. The entire vast and impressive apparatus of Sumerian civilization was a life raft. It was a vessel constructed with immense care and precision by a prior, unseen intelligence, designed for the sole purpose of carrying a specific, condensed message across a catastrophic flood of time and forgetting. The Sumerians themselves were the dedicated crew of this vessel, performing their ritualized duties of copying and accounting with a diligence born of sacred tradition, perhaps never fully understanding the true nature or origin of the cargo they were tasked to protect until the waters receded. To follow this pattern as it unfolds is to recognize that this archive is only a single chamber in a much larger, unmapped structure. The implications that arise here are not an end, but an echo. Remaining with this work is to commit to tracing that echo back towards its source, however distant, however silent. The Great Flood, then, ceases to be a singular event that happened in the distant past. It becomes the organizing principle of the entire system of preservation. The line in the king list, "Then the flood swept over," is not just a historical marker. It is the fundamental reason for the list's existence. The records are not merely from a time before and after the cataclysm. They are records that exist because of the cataclysm. It was the terminal event of the previous world that necessitated the creation of this durable, fragmented, and context-stripped backup in the first place. The archive is a post-disaster recovery kit. The silence, the great invisible antagonist, is therefore not an enemy of the record. It is its co-author. The deliberate, surgical removal of context, philosophy, and narrative was a necessary act of data compression. to ensure the survival of the core signal, the numbers, the names, the formulas, all the surrounding noise had to be stripped away. What we perceive as a catastrophic loss of information was, from the perspective of the system's architects, a feat of engineering. They sacrificed the body of their knowledge to save its skeletal structure, trusting that the function of the bones would be enough to transmit the memory of the whole. This forces a complete inversion of the investigative process. We have been looking at the evidence backwards, trying to reconstruct a lost world from these scattered fragments. But perhaps the fragments were never intended to be a blueprint for reconstruction. Perhaps they were intended to be a signal, a beacon. Their primary purpose was not to tell us what the old world was, but simply to transmit the fact that it was, and that its end was of such a nature that this extraordinary effort of preservation was required. The message is not the content of the tablets, but the existence of the tablets themselves, a message in a bottle where the bottle is the key. The hand of the scribe, moving with its practiced impersonal precision, was not the hand of an author expressing a thought. It was the hand of a terminal, a biological component in a much larger machine of transmission. He was the writing head of a vast, slow-moving printer, outputting the final, critical lines of a program before a planned system shutdown. The absolute consistency of his work across centuries was not a sign of cultural stagnation, but of a protocol being followed with perfect, unwavering fidelity. The protocol was the mission. The atemporal, fully formed administrative language found in the earliest tablets is the clearest evidence of this. It is the language of the prior system, the legacy code, embedded directly into the new one without translation or adaptation. It is like finding lines of perfectly functional Python script in a medieval illuminated manuscript. It does not belong. It could not have evolved there naturally, and its presence is undeniable proof that one system was built directly upon the invisible ruins of another, using its salvaged, still functional components, without understanding their origin. The investigation, therefore, is no longer about Sumer. Sumer is the name of the archive's location, not its subject. The true subject is the civilization that designed this system of preservation. A civilization for which we have no name, no artifacts, and no direct historical record. Their only signature is the shadow they cast, the highly structured void they left at the center of our own history, and the functional fragments of their immense knowledge they chose to embed in the foundations of the world that would follow them, like a coded message written into the DNA of their successor. The scale of this implication is vertiginous. We are not dealing with the memory of a lost kingdom or a forgotten age of heroes. We are dealing with the legacy of a different order of reality, a different timeline altogether. The numbers in the king list, the reigns of 241, 200 years before the flood, are not a fantasy to be dismissed or a metaphor to be deciphered. They are a coordinate. They are a point of reference on a map so vast that the entirety of our own recorded history is a single, unmarked feature within its borders, a brief period of calm weather after the storm. The final, unsettling implication is that we are, in some sense, still living inside the archive. The foundational structures of law, power, and sacred knowledge that organize our own world may not be our own inventions. They may simply be the faint, degraded echoes of the me, the programs that were salvaged and reinstalled after the last great system failure. We are not the inheritors of Sumer. We are the inheritors of its inheritance, the distant, unwitting users of a software so ancient, so fundamental, that we have long ago mistaken its operations for the immutable laws of nature itself. We are running a program we did not write, for a purpose we can no longer remember. The archive is quiet again. The hour has passed beyond late, into the time of stillness, when the work of the day is done and the only movement is the slow turning of the earth. Outside these walls the world continues its rapid, noisy passage. But in here, under the low, even light, time is measured differently. It is measured by the half-life of clay and the slow fade of a memory impressed upon it 5,000 years ago. The air itself feels ancient, heavy with the dust of questions that have outlived their answers. To remain here now is not to search for a conclusion, but to bear witness to the persistence of the query itself, suspended in the sterile, silent air. We are left where we began, with a single object, a block of hardened earth, cool and dense in its climate-controlled case. Its surface, a landscape of tiny, wedge-shaped valleys, seems different now. It is no longer a text to be read, but a device to be contemplated. The information it holds is not in the translation of its marks, but in their arrangement, their formulaic repetition, their cold and unwavering discipline. It is the last working component of a machine whose other parts are lost to a corrosion so profound it has consumed the very memory of the machine's purpose. The tablet does not speak of its origins. It simply is, a fact as solid and inscrutable as a stone. The hand of the scribe who made this object is a ghost in the room. One can almost feel the slight pressure of the reed stylus as it displaced the wet clay, the practiced economy of motion that came from endless repetition. But his intention is now an uncrossable distance away. Was he a keeper of a sacred trust, a knowing participant in a vast project of preservation? Or was he merely a functionary, a man performing a task whose true scale was as unknown to him as the world that would one day unearth his work? The record gives no clue. The man has vanished completely, leaving behind only the perfect impersonal execution of his function. The numbers he recorded now hang in the air with a new kind of weight. 28, 800 years. 43, 200 years. They are no longer just impossibilities to be explained away as myth or metaphor. They have become markers of a scale, coordinates of a reality so far removed from our own that we lack the grammar to properly articulate it. They are the faint, residual radiation of a star that has long since gone dark, a signal of a different order of time, a different physics of existence. They do not ask for belief. They simply state a value from a system whose baseline is a complete and permanent unknown. And the silence that surrounds these numbers, the great structured void where the explanations should be, is no longer an absence. It feels now like a presence, a deliberate and carefully constructed space. It is the silence of a sealed chamber, of a message packed in a vacuum to protect it from the decay of interpretation. Perhaps the context was not lost, but intentionally sacrificed. Perhaps the architects of this system understood that stories decay, philosophies are replaced, and religions fade, but that a clean, hard, numerical sequence, stripped of all meaning, might just be durable enough to survive the fall of a world. From the window of this quiet room, one can imagine the landscape from which the tablet was taken. The great sleeping mounds of southern Iraq, rising from the flat plain under a sky immense and filled with stars. The ruins of Eridu and Uruk, buried under the dust of millennia. Those are not just the graves of cities. They are the libraries of a civilization that chose the earth itself as its final archive. Each layer of sediment, each stratum of wind-blown sand, is a page of silence, a chapter in the long, slow story of what was left unrecorded. The land itself has become the final, unreadable text. The desert wind does not carry answers. It only moves the sand, covering and uncovering the edges of forgotten things. It is a sound that has no memory, a force of pure entropy. To stand in that wind at night, between the silent stars and the silent ruins, is to feel the true scale of the loss. It is to understand that what has been recovered is a single grain of sand from a coastline that has been washed away entirely. The immensity of what is gone is a physical presence, a pressure against the senses, a silence that is older and more profound than any word. The question has not been resolved. It has only been amplified. It has expanded from the marks on a single tablet to the very foundations of what we call history. Are we the builders of a new and unique structure Or are we merely inhabitants of an ancient one, living in rooms whose original purpose we have long forgotten, mistaking the design of the foundation for the natural contours of the earth? The evidence offers no final verdict. It only points, with unwavering consistency, towards a depth in the past that our current measures cannot fully sound. The others, the Anunnaki, have receded completely, leaving behind only the cold bureaucratic architecture they designed. Their names are the labels on a schematic for a machine that no longer runs. They are not gods to be worshipped or aliens to be contacted. They are an explanatory variable in an equation that cannot be solved, a reference to a source code that has been permanently deleted. Their most powerful and enduring legacy is the coherence of the system they left behind, and their own complete and total absence from it. They are the ghost of a perfect, rational order. We are now the final link in this long chain of transmission. The scribe copied the data onto clay. The earth preserved the clay. The archaeologist uncovered it. The curator protects it. And now, we who have watched, we who have listened in this quiet, have received the signal. The responsibility for the question has been transferred. It now rests not in the archive, but in the mind that has perceived the pattern. The act of observation has made us part of the story. The newest scribes tasked with copying the silence, with preserving the integrity of the doubt. It is not a story that can be known, but perhaps it is one that can be remembered. Not as a sequence of events, but as a feeling, a resonance. The strange familiarity of the bureaucratic language, the intuitive logic of the lists, the echo of a vast, orderly system. It is the sensation of a phantom limb, the memory of a structure to which we were once attached. We are surrounded by the faint, degraded output of a program that has been running for so long we are no longer aware of its execution. We are born into the archive. So it remains, a piece of fired mud in a glass box, an object of immense and fragile power. It has survived the fall of its city, the death of its language, and the long, slow erosion of millennia. It has carried its fragment of a signal through a cataclysm of forgetting that consumed the world from which it came. It is a testament not to the power of kings or the wisdom of gods, but to a simpler, more profound idea, that a thing once written can refuse to be erased, that a pattern once set can continue to resonate long after its source has gone silent. The low light in the archive seems to dim further. The work is done. The files are closed. The only task that remains is to watch, to sit with the object in the deepening quiet. The cuneiform marks hold the last of the light, their tiny, shadowed lines forming a language that is no longer meant to be read for its content, but to be seen for what it is. The final, irreducible evidence of a message sent from an impossible distance, a message that has, against all odds, been delivered. And now, there is only the silence of the tablet, the silence of the archive, the silence of the deep past, which does not answer, but only waits. It is a silence that is not empty. It is filled with the weight of a single, unanswered, and perhaps unanswerable question, resting now in the quiet custody of the night.